I was doing a podcast the other day and somebody asked a question that we get quite a bit, which is, you know, how do we talk with our older adult family members, usually a parent, about the best living arrangement for the long term? What we're really talking about here is this idea of staying in your own home, aging in place, versus looking at some sort of a senior living option. And different people have different preferences. But I do hear a lot from adult children who say, we're just not, maybe it's because they don't live in the same area or whatever the situation may be, that, they're just not sure that their parents staying in their own home is the best long-term solution, but they're not sure really how to approach that subject with their parents. And so this is, understandably, it can be difficult at times. And the interesting thing is that, surveys show that most people want to stay in their own homes. Depending on the survey, 80 or 90% of people say they want to stay in their own home as long as possible. Yet other surveys show that anywhere between 60 or 80% of people don't want to be a burden on their family. So you have this really, interesting intersection there, because usually staying in your own home means that there will be increased dependence on family. Now, the degree of dependence can certainly vary depending on the situation and the person's health and mobility and all of these things. But certainly to some extent, even if you hire caregivers and those kind of things, family members are going to have to be involved to often, oversee that. Somebody's got to kind of manage that whole process, make sure people are showing up on time, dealing with all the little things that can arise. And that may be fine. But you have to really think through these sort of scenarios and the level of involvement that would be required. And the challenging thing, too, as a side note, with home care is that unless it's 24-hour care, which as we know can be just exorbitantly expensive, the challenge is that if it's not 24-hour home care, something can happen anytime. Whether it's a fall or whatever, and then, all of a sudden it's kind of an emergency situation where the family has to be there and those kind of things. So it's almost like being on call. Again, this isn't to say it can't be done, and there's some wonderful caregivers and caregiving agencies out there, but these are things that you have to think about. And that leads to where I really want to go in answering the question, is how do you have that discussion with a parent or an older family member without seeming like you're being critical or trying to force them to do something. I think the best way is just to have a conversation. It's not a me against you or a force type of thing. It's a constructive conversation that starts with, what would be the expectation for you as well as for me as your adult child or family member if this were to happen or if this were to happen. And maybe you can point to examples from another family or maybe an article or something that you've read, but that's really important, is to first recognize, okay, I understand you want to stay in your home. I respect that. This is the home you love, and it's familiar and you have the memories and everything. It's where you're comfortable. But, what would we do if this happened or this, whether it's a sudden thing or more of a gradual thing, but it's really important to talk through those scenarios, because if both parties can't really answer that, if both parties can't really say what that situation would look like or what they would want, then you're just not there yet. I mean, all the options still need to be on the table. So I really think, again, it's a constructive conversation that really begins with what would you want? What would be your expectations if something like this were to happen? And you could use 3, 4, 5 different examples, because you really want to try to think of all the various things that could occur. Now, some people say, well, that won't happen to me, or I'm healthy, or you don't have to worry about that. But we all know that things can happen. Again, sometimes unexpectedly, sometimes more gradual, but things can certainly happen. So we have to be willing to talk about those things. And if not, it can lead to very difficult situations later. So hopefully this has been helpful.